Good afternoon, my beautiful babes and babettes. I'm your resident active advocate, and I would like to talk to you today about the next movie in the Disney timeline that has the most relevant disability narrative in it, and that would be The Little Mermaid. As stated by Lindsay Ellis, former Nostalgia Chick, in one of her videos, technically The Little Mermaid did not start the Disney Renaissance. That honor goes to Who Framed Roger Rabbit. But this is definitely the movie that made Disney the most famous in the late 80s. But unfortunately, the narrative presented in this movie is iffy when it comes to both feminism and disability. So I'm not going to do a full-on, what's it called? The Little Mermaid and feminism video. I'm not going to do that. I'm just going to touch on that here, but this will be my usual sort of content. In terms of the feminist lens, Ariel, the Little Mermaid, sells her voice to an evil witch who gives her human legs so that Ariel can woo the prince with whom she has fallen in love. Given that this is the Disney formula and the fairy tale formula, this is what is called online, quote, insta-love, and love at first sight. You know that old trope. It, is present in quite a few very famous stories. This was much more prominent in fairy tales and therefore in earlier, by today's standards anyway, earlier Disney, because Disney finds its comfort zone in Western European folklore for the most part, right? So Ariel falls in love with the Prince Eric and gives up her voice in exchange for human legs. That looks really bad on feminism, absolutely. That and the fact that she has to secure love's true kiss from him within a 3-day time limit because, again, it's the Disney formula, or else Ursula, rather, I'm sorry, owns Ariel's right to autonomy. And Ariel becomes part of Ursula's sort of treasure trove of pets, which are all mildly disturbing. But with the lack of voice also comes the lack of swimming ability. So, as a mermaid, coming from the mermaid perspective, Ariel would be severely physically disabled in that she can no longer swim at deep depths in the water. She can't swim very effectively in general because human legs are not cut out for swimming in the same way that a fish's tail is. In that context, in the context of the world in which she came from, she would be considered severely disabled. She would also no longer be welcome there because humans are known for plundering the sea for its treasures and for its aquatic life, and are also often known for harming mermaids. In the context of this story, Ariel's father, King Triton, has a very understandable prejudice against humans since they're always pilfering both his treasures and his subjects. In the human context, though, Ariel is disabled in that she is nonverbal, but there is a positive sort of aspect to this. Ariel finds effective ways in which to communicate through body language. Ursula even says to her, do not underestimate the effectiveness of body language. And that is true. Pardon me, stretching my face. That is true that Ariel is able to communicate using her hands, pointing at things. She can still communicate reasonably effectively, but it's not the same and it's not portrayed as being the same. The problem I have with this is that while it can be looked upon as effective, it can also be looked upon as a form of just sheer mimicry of mime. She doesn't develop any actual systemic form of sign language, not that you would expect her to given the 3-day time limit here. She can't properly sign. there's really no awareness of how she is going to function as a human going into this deal. In the original Hans Christian Andersen story as well, this was removed in the movie, but in the original story, Ariel would also have piercing pains in her feet when she went to walk. In the book, in the story, I am not fond of this at all because it says that she just overcame the pain and floated like a bubble around the dance floor. And, she was still very able, quotation marks, and graceful despite the physical pain that she was in. Now, in the real world, great physical pain of that nature would likely necessitate the use of a wheelchair or of some supportive device if you were not able to properly use your feet or your legs. And there should be no harm in that. There should be no shame in that. And the fact that Ariel would have had to use a device of that nature, is sort of framed. I mean, this was not like Anderson did not necessarily write before the invention of mobility support, of mobility aids, but it's portrayed by him as a sort of inferior way of getting around. I don't like that. So I do feel okay with the fact that Disney did not include that part of the narrative. What I really have a problem with, though, is that Ariel sells her capabilities as a singer in order to get the man, who she has never spoken to and cannot speak to until he falls properly in love with her. Well, okay, quotation marks, properly, by Disney/fairy tale standards. 3-day window, as I say, and in later Disney movies, they even make fun of this. You fell in love with someone you just met? Right? But we'll get to that later. I like that much better. But in the context of this movie, Ariel willingly disables herself in order to win the man. Again, this is both positive and negative. On the one hand, he does fall in love with her despite her lack of voice, which indicates a sort of progressive narrative of, yes, I can fall in love with a person with a disability. That is possible for me to do, even in the context of the long ago, far away time, right? If the fairy tale world. But it's also negative in that the rest of the world perceives her as someone who is in fact not desirable. You hear his servants talking about it like, why would he bring this girl home? She can't even speak. We don't know where she's from. We don't know who her parents are. We don't know whether she is, on paper, a suitable match for this literal prince. You know, Ariel in her own kingdom, by the way, is also ruled like royalty. As I say, King Triton is her father. And she gives up that role as well in order to facilitate falling in love with this man. So, as I say, this movie is a mixed bag. It has both positive and negative representations of disability in it. I think, though, that the negatives outweigh the positives, at least to some regard, in that she willingly disables herself for what I would say are all the wrong reasons. And that had to be done as well because her father is a racist. Understandably so, because humans have harmed many of his subjects, have literally eaten many of his subjects, and that to him is not okay. That in the real world would not be okay. And there's this odd sort of narrative of race relation there. But it's also not okay for Ariel to give up what makes her someone extraordinarily unique and talented, which is her voice, in order to facilitate this relationship. However, on the other hand, from that, Eric still falls in love with her, despite her lack of voice and her not being who he thought she was. Seeing her from a distance, he thought, oh yeah, that's the one who rescued me, but then finds out she can't speak and says, no, you must not be the right one, but falls in love with her anyway. even though she was the right one, after all, by the way. Yeah, earlier in the movie, surprise, surprise, she saves his life. So Ariel herself is a very capable princess, I think, but only if you give her the right tools in the right context and sort of strip her of this rather, in my eyes at least, vapid motivation. I don't think it's worth giving up your whole identity just for the sake of this person you've never even had a conversation with and can't have a conversation with unless he kisses you in the mandatory 3-day window. So, all in all, not overly fond of this one. There are positive aspects to this narrative, but I would encourage anyone watching this to make up their own mind. I think that I've laid out enough of the negatives versus positives for a discerning viewer to make up their own mind about what this story not only is trying to say, but also what it represents and how those representations are presented to us as the audience. All right. So that is our video for today. I am exhausted, which is why I'm not particularly articulate. I apologize for that. Hopefully tomorrow I'll be feeling better than I am now, and we will get to another lovely Disney Renaissance movie. I actually really like the movies in the Renaissance, just not this one. So, all right. Have a lovely, wonderful afternoon, and I will see y'all tomorrow. Mwah!